Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of What's on My Desk. And I got a good one for you today. We have an architectural timepiece. We have a watch that reminds me of that show, Game of Thrones, My Moon and My Stars. We have a very, very special Lange Söhne tourbillon, and we have a gold coin watch like no other. So let's get into it. So while I don't like to pick favorites when I put in a lineup, sometimes I can't help myself to do so, but I'd rather say probably the watch I'm most excited with is the one I'm going to start with because it's the latest and the greatest. It just came out. I'm talking about the Hublot MP-07 Becca, aka the Arsham Splash. But to really understand the watch, right, we got to kind of go over how we got here. So Daniel Arsham, one of my favorite contemporary artists, originally wanted to be an architect. And even though it didn't work out, that way of thinking kind of never left him, I guess. So instead of focusing on how things are built, he became, I would say, obsessed in what happens to them over time. How do they change? How do they erode? How do they collapse, right? The idea of subtracting material instead of adding defines everything that he does. And once you understand that and you look at some of his art pieces out there, this watch actually starts to click. And therefore, this case doesn't feel traditionally engineered, right? It feels carved, like I guess material was removed until this exact shape was actually left behind, right? The splash opening on a dial isn't just a design detail either. It's meant to capture the exact moment a droplet hits a surface and spreads outwards, sort of, I'd say, frozen in time, right? Now, if this language feels familiar, it should. It shows up all over his objects for living furniture. If you guys, again, are familiar with Arsham, if you're not, I strongly urge that you check him out, right? Chairs, tables that look soft and almost melting like they were in the middle of breaking down. He's even experimented with Play-Doh to create those organic forms before turning them into cast bronze and resin pieces. Now, what you're seeing here is that very same idea just translated into titanium and sapphire. Right? This is what makes this collaboration different. Hublot didn't just partner with an artist, they actually let him shape the watch itself. And I would say Hublot is probably the perfect brand for that. Their whole identity is built around art of fusion, right? Mixing materials, disciplines, ideas. And this wasn't random either. Arsham has already been working with them on large-scale installations before this. If you scroll down on his profile on Hublot, you'll see what I'm talking about. This was just, I guess, a natural evolution of that relationship. Now, what makes this watch even more interesting is what's happening inside. The Mecha 10 movement is very structured, very mechanical, almost industrial, the way it's laid out, I would say, right? This thing has a power reserve display like a machine, not a traditional dial. And then you wrap it all in a case that feels, I'd say, soft and fluid, right? Almost organic. It becomes a really interesting contrast is what I'm trying to say. Even the smaller details stay consistent with the concept. The green accents reference oxidation, like the watch has already started to age. Think of some of his bronze sculptures, right? The sapphire isn't perfectly polished. You would expect it to be this high polished crystal and glossy, but it has more of a raw matte feel to it, which is, by the way, harder to achieve when you're working with crystal. Even the box that it came in, when you open the thing, you feel like you're uncovering something rather than just opening a watch box. To zoom out from the watch for a second, and if you think about it, this is where our industry is kind of heading, right? It's not just about complications or heritage anymore. Brands are working with artists who can bring a completely different perspective and actually reshape the product itself. You see it in here with this Hublot, you've seen it with Audemars Piguet and Cause, and it's basically pushing watches into that space right between design, art, and culture. And that's what this really is. It's not just a watch, but an idea turned into something that you can actually wear. Switching gears completely, really, I'm going to talk about the 6104 Celestial. This happens to be the baguette diamond version. And the idea behind this watch comes from a much bigger story inside Patek Philippe. If you go back into early 2000s, and what we're going back to is my personal grail watch, and that is the Patek 5002, the Sky Moon Tourbillon. At the time, one of the most complicated watches that I ever made. This watch was double-sided. Extremely complicated, and on the back was what? Something that stood out in a very different way compared to the rest of other complication. It had display of the night sky, which you see on this watch. It wasn't decorative, not stylized, but an actual astronomical display showing the stars in the moon phase and the way the sky moves in real time. And what's interesting is that instead of just leaving that as a feature of one of the most complicated watches, Patek decided to take that out and build an entire watch around it. That's where the Celestial comes in. In 2002, they introduced the reference 5102, and now the sky display is no longer something hidden on the back of a watch. It becomes the entire focus of the piece. That's really the starting point for everything that you are looking here. The 5102 itself already felt very niche. It wasn't something widely produced. It wasn't designed to appeal to everyone. But towards the end of the production, they released a version called the 5102 PR. It was a two-tone. It was rose and platinum. And that configuration really knocked it out of the park. Aesthetically, to me, that was probably the best one. And that specific reference is important because production was extremely limited, generally accepted to be, they say, around under 100 pieces. And also, one of those watches that doesn't really show up often, right? It's not something you see circulating in the market regularly. And because of that, it became quite the collector piece over time. In fact, all the 5102s are making a comeback, the yellow, the white, and the PR. Of course, the next logical thing was the next version, which was the 6104. Now, you can see how Patek basically evolved the same concept without really changing what made it special. What the difference obviously was that the case became 44 millimeters. It presented a bit stronger, and visually it leans more into modern luxury feel, especially with the baguette bezel version that we have here. It's definitely more noticeable on the wrist compared to the earlier pieces. I've always felt the 5102 was subdued luxury, where the 6104 made it a bit louder. And what did it make louder specifically? Obviously, the night sky. Now, how's this thing built? I would say fairly simple, right? It's 3 sapphire discs, right? They're all stacked on top of each other. One represents the sky, one represents the stars, and the one that represents the moon. And each of them moves at a different speed to recreate the actual motion of the sky as you would see it. What you're looking at is not static. It's constantly changing throughout day and night. On top of that, you have the moon phase, the orbit of the moon, the date around the edge of the dial, and even the timing when the moon and Sirius cross the meridian, which is something most people don't even think about it until they start really digging into this watch. Now, one of the details that tends to get overlooked, but it's actually really important, is that the display is calibrated to Geneva. The oval you see in the dial is not just a design element, it represents the portion of the sky that is visible from that latitude. That's a very Patek Philippe detail. It's precise, it's intentional, and it ties the watch back where it was created. Now inside you have the 240 LUCLC, which is part of Patek's micro rotor family. This is a movement they've been using for decades, and it's known for being thin, reliable, while still allowing it to be complications on top of it, as you see here. And I think this is where the watch really starts to make sense. If you look at one on its own, it can feel a little abstract. It's not immediately obvious why this watch matters, right? But when you trace it back, starting from the Skyline Tourbillon, then into the 5102, then the 5102 PR, and finally onto the 6104, you start to sort of see that this is actually a very consistent idea that Patek has been refining for over 20 years. It's not about making something louder, more complicated, just for the sake of it. It's about taking something that's already incredibly technical, like tracking the sky in real time, and turning it into something that you can wear and actually interact with. Switching gears to a brand I've often said quality of which is that better than a Patek Philippe when it comes to its guts. We're talking about, of course, Lange Söhne. And what I brought is a very, very special watch, and that is the Lange Söhne Tourbillon reference 704032. But let's talk about what is arguably one of the greatest comebacks in watchmaking before we get into this watch. Lange Söhne was originally founded in 1845 by German town of Glashütte by Ferdinand Adolf Lange, who transformed a small mining town, it literally was a mining town, into a center of precision watchmaking. Unfortunately, after World War II, everything disappeared. The factory was destroyed, the company was nationalized in 1948, and for more than 40 years, Lange simply did not exist. They made this one company called GUB, I forget what the acronym stand for, that was government control. Of course, in 1990, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Walter Lange returned. He partnered with Gunther Blümlein and set out to rebuild the brand literally from the ground up, like nothing was left, right? 4 years later, October 24, 1994, inside the Dresden Royal Palace, they relaunched the company with 4 watches: the Lange 1, the Saxonia, the Arcade, and the Tourbillon Pour Le Mérite. And out of those 4, the Lange 1 changed everything. If we go back to that time, every single dress watch followed the same symmetrical layout. The Lange 1 came in completely different. Off-center time display, oversized date, power reserve, small seconds, nothing lined up the way you would expect it, but somehow it all worked perfectly. That's because it wasn't random. The entire dial is built on what we call the golden ratio. The centers of the display form an exact geometric relationship, which is why it feels balanced even though it looks unconventional. Now, the outsides, they became the signature. It was inspired by the 5-minute clock at the Semper Opera House in Dresden, and it uses 2 discs instead of 1, making it dramatically easier to read. So that Lange 1 wasn't just a new model. It reintroduced German watchmaking to the world and immediately positioned Lange alongside brands like Patek Philippe. Now let's fast forward and you get this limited edition Lange 1 Tourbillon in rose gold. They made 250 in rose gold, and I made 150 in platinum or 100. Don't quote me, I don't remember exactly, right? And this is what happens when you take the original design and push it into high complication territory without losing what made it special in the first place. Because Lange didn't redesign the watch, they respected it. The asymmetrical layout is still intact. The outsized date is still there. The identity hasn't changed. What they did was they integrated a tourbillon into the architecture in a way that feels like it belongs there, not like it was added just to impress. Think about your traditional tourbillons at 6 o'clock that are front and center. Whenever one creates a tourbillon, you tend to want to show off that tourbillon and show the fact that this is a tourbillon. They did it so subtly here, again, in order to respect the original design. And it still feels like the first Lange one. This wasn't about adding complication. It was about how a design from 1984 was so well thought out that decades later you can evolve it, complicate it, elevate it, and yet it still feels right. And the next thing I'm going to talk about is the $20 coin yellow gold watch from Corum. Now, what you're looking at is not just a watch, right? It's an actual piece of history turned into a timepiece, right? That's an actual real $20 gold coin. But to really understand what this is, you have to separate it from what most people think when they think of a coin watch, right? Because Corum didn't invent coin watches. Brands like Patek Philippe and even Cartier were already making coin watches decades earlier, but those were hidden watches, right? You'd open the coin, inside was a small dial. It was more of a novelty, almost like a secret object. A lot of the times those things came as pocket watches and not even on the wrist. But what Corum did in 1964 was actually completely different. They took a real $20 double eagle coin, physically cut it into two halves, and built the watch inside. No hinge, no opening mechanism. The coin itself pretty much became the watch. And that's the shift, right? So instead of hiding the watch inside the coin is the dial, the case, and the identity of the entire piece. While that sounds simple, it's actually one of the more complicated constructions of watchmaking. First of all, you're working with a real coin that already has value, already has historical significance, and you're cutting it in half without destroying what makes it a coin in the first place. One half becomes the dial side, and the other half becomes the case back. And in between, you have this ultra-thin movement sandwiched inside, right? That's why these watches are so slim. You had to engineer the entire watch around the thickness of the coin. And the detail on this particular watch that really ties it all together is the case band. If you look at the side of the case, it's not smooth, right? It's what we call coin edge. That's what you expect from a coin, right? You have the coin edge. That's where it came from, right? Just like the edge of the original coin. That's really intentional. That's what keeps the watch from looking like a watch with a coin dial. From the side, it still reads like a coin. Now, this specific watch takes it a step further, and that is with the additional of an old gold 18-karat bracelet, right? And it's matching. How is it matching? Well, guess what? They took the coin edge from the coin itself and they translated it onto the side of the bracelet. And this actually changes the entire feel of the watch. Most coin watches feel like an object on your wrist. This feels like a complete piece of jewelry, if you will. The bracelet doesn't interrupt the design. It continues it. Same color, same material, same weight. Again, same coin edge on the side of the bracelet. And it kind of becomes a continuous gold form. If I put it on my wrist, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. A bit big on me, but not gonna lie, but I'm sure you get the idea. Now, we got to talk about the coin itself. It does matter. Corum focused heavily on the American $20 double eagle, which was minted from the mid-1800s into the early 1900s. The 22-karat gold coin with Liberty on one side and eagle on the other. It already carried weight before it ever became a watch. So when you're wearing this, you're not just wearing a gold watch. You're wearing something that started as a currency, was taken out of circulation, became a collectible, and that was turned into a watch. It's right between numismatics and watchmaking. And in terms of rarity, it's important to be accurate. Corum made coin watches for a long time, so the idea itself isn't rare, but this particular configuration actually is. First of all, the $20 double eagle coin, which is a larger, more desirable coin. You've got an automatic movement inside. A lot of these things were quartz, and you got the full 18-karat yellow gold bracelet to match. Most examples, like I said, you see are going to be straps. Bracelet versions like this are far less common, and they feel very, very different on the wrist. And at the end of the day, what really makes this watch interesting is it's not really about complications. It's not about being flashy. It's about the concept. You took something that was literally money and you turned it into time. In either case, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions, as always, comment them below. Like, share, subscribe if you're not a subscriber, and I will see you on the next one.